The California sun hung like a white-hot coin over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, baking the concrete training pad until heat shimmered in visible waves. Lieutenant Jessica Martinez stood at the center of it all, her Navy combat boots planted shoulder-width apart, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady despite the jackhammer rhythm of her heart. Around her, arranged in a perfect tactical formation that left no gaps, stood 282 Navy SEALs, instructors, candidates, and observers who'd been summoned for what command had labeled a mandatory hand-to-hand combat demonstration. But Jessica knew better. This wasn't a demonstration. This was an execution. She'd known it the moment she saw the formation. Known it when Commander Rourke personally ordered her to the training pad at 600 hours. Known it when she spotted Instructors Petty Officer First Class Derek Stone and Chief Warrant Officer Mike Brennan walking toward her with that particular combination of swagger and purpose that combat veterans wore like a second skin. Derek Stone was a legend. 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, 2 deployments to Afghanistan where he'd earned the nickname Tombstone for the way he cleared rooms. At 6'3" and 230 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, he moved with the controlled violence of a caged predator. His shaved head gleamed with sweat, and his gray eyes held all the warmth of a winter ocean. Mike Brennan stood shorter but somehow more dangerous. He'd survived the Second Battle of Fallujah, had pulled 3 wounded Marines from a burning Humvee while under direct fire, and had more confirmed kills than most snipers achieved in their entire careers. His left ankle had taken shrapnel that should have ended his military service, but he'd rehabbed through pain that made other men quit, earning his limp and the respect of every SEAL who knew his story. These were the men chosen to evaluate Jessica's combat readiness. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the assembled crowd like wind through tall grass. Jessica caught fragments, some doubtful, some curious, most openly skeptical. First woman to make it this far. But S is gonna eat her alive. She doesn't belong here. I give her 30 seconds before Stone puts her down. Jessica had heard it all before. Heard it from her father, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez, USMC retired, who'd looked at his 17-year-old daughter's application to the Naval Academy and said, "Jess, be realistic. Women aren't built for special operations. Why don't you consider nursing? Intelligence work." Heard it from the recruiter who tried to redirect her toward administrative roles, suggesting her talents would be better utilized supporting the teams rather than joining them. Heard it from every doubt-filled voice in her own head during the countless nights when her body screamed for her to quit, when Hell Week seemed designed by sadists, when the cold Pacific Ocean tried to steal the warmth from her bones and the will from her soul. But she'd made it through every evolution, every test, every impossible standard. 37 candidates had started with her class. 36 had rung the bell, admitting defeat, choosing the warm coffee and blankets over the suffering required to earn the trident. Jessica was the last one standing, the only woman, the first woman to reach the hand-to-hand combat qualification trials. And now, under the merciless California sun, she would either prove she belonged or become a cautionary tale whispered in ready rooms for the next decade. Stone and Brennan stopped 10 feet away, exchanged a look that lasted half a second but communicated volumes. Jessica recognized that look. She'd seen it in locker rooms before championship fights, in briefing rooms before dangerous missions, in the eyes of men who'd already decided on a course of action and were simply waiting for the moment to execute. Commander James Rourke stood on the elevated observation platform, his weathered face unreadable behind aviator sunglasses. He'd served 3 tours in Iraq, had a Navy Cross gathering dust in some drawer at home, and ran Bud S with an iron fist wrapped in the American flag. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, he would judge it with the cold calculation of a man who'd sent warriors into combat and welcomed too few home. The morning breeze died completely, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Stone cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking branches. Brennan rolled his shoulders, his scarred neck muscles bunching and releasing. Jessica noticed his stance, left foot slightly back, protecting that damaged ankle. She filed the information away in the combat computer her mind had become, categorizing weaknesses, calculating angles, preparing for what she knew was coming. Lieutenant Martinez, Stone's voice carried across the silent compound with the authority of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. Today, we demonstrate advanced close-quarters combat techniques. Are you ready? Jessica met his eyes without flinching. Huya, instructor. A smile ghosted across Stone's face. Not friendly, not respectful, the smile of a hunter who just spotted prey. Outstanding, he said, beginning to circle her like a shark testing the waters. Let's see what you've got. The 282 SEALs tightened their circle, moving closer, hungry for blood. Stone circled to Jessica's left, his boots grinding against the concrete with deliberate menace. Each step was measured, calculated, the movement of a predator establishing dominance before the strike. Jessica rotated with him, maintaining distance, keeping both instructors in her peripheral vision. Brennan had drifted to her right flank, creating a tactical pincer that any first-year Bud-S candidate would recognize as a two-man assault pattern. This wasn't standard training protocol. Demonstrations were supposed to be one-on-one, controlled, educational. This was something else entirely. In real combat, Stone announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying that parade ground authority that demanded attention. SEALs don't face cooperative opponents. We don't get referees. We don't get timeouts. He feinted left and Jessica's body responded automatically, shifting her weight, hands coming up in a defensive posture. Stone smiled at her reaction. Good instincts, Lieutenant. You'll need them. Without warning, he exploded forward. The attack came fast, a double jab combination followed by a leg sweep that would have taken down most fighters. Jessica slipped the first jab, parried the second, and stepped over the sweep, creating space. Her counter was textbook, a palm heel strike towards Stone's solar plexus that he blocked but had to respect. They separated, resetting. The crowd murmured approval. She'd handled the exchange well. Then Brennan attacked from behind. Jessica's combat awareness screamed danger half a second before his arm snaked around her throat, attempting a rear naked choke. She tucked her chin, preventing the proper blood choke position, and drove her elbow backward into his ribs. Brennan grunted but didn't release, instead attempting to drag her to the ground where his grappling advantage would be overwhelming. The crowd's murmur turned to something darker. This wasn't right. This wasn't the brief demonstration. Hey, someone called from the formation. Jessica couldn't identify the voice, but it carried concern. That's not simulating real combat conditions. Stone cut off the objection, his voice sharp as a blade. Enemy doesn't send one guy. Enemy doesn't wait for you to finish your current fight before joining in. He moved back toward Jessica as she struggled against Brennan's grip. In Ramadi, in Helmand Province, in every shithole where SEALs operate, fair fights don't exist. You adapt or you die. Jessica managed to break Brennan's choke hold with a jaw strike that made his teeth click together, spinning away and creating distance from both instructors. Her chest heaved, adrenaline flooding her system. She'd trained for multiple attackers, had spent hundreds of hours in the combatives' gym, but this was different. This was sanctioned institutional resistance wrapped in the language of realism. Stone and Brennan spread wider now, forcing her to divide her attention. The mathematical problem was simple and brutal. She couldn't watch both simultaneously. One would always be in her blind spot. Reset, Lieutenant, Stone ordered, that predatory smile still playing at his lips. We're just getting started. Jessica moved back to the center of the pad, recalculating. Her mind raced through the implications. If she called foul, complained about the 2-on-1 scenario, she'd be labeled weak, unable to handle real-world conditions. If she continued, she was accepting a rigged game where the outcome was predetermined. Either way, they won. She glanced at the observation platform. Commander Rourke stood motionless, his expression hidden behind those aviator sunglasses. No intervention coming from that quarter. In the crowd, she spotted faces she recognized from her training class. Rodriguez, who'd washed out during Hell Week after developing pneumonia. Chen, who'd fractured his femur during a parachute landing. Martinez, who'd simply decided the sacrifice wasn't worth it. They watched with mixed expressions. Some sympathetic, some satisfied to see her struggle, some simply curious about how this would end. Her father's words echoed in her memory, spoken 6 months ago when she'd called home after passing the initial screening. "Jess, they're never going to truly accept you. You know that, right? You can be twice as good and they'll still find reasons you don't belong. You sure this is the hill you want to die on?" She told him yes then. Now, standing in the center of this concrete coliseum with 282 witnesses and 2 combat veterans preparing to dismantle her, she asked herself the same question. Brennan rolled his damaged ankle, testing it. Jessica caught the movement, just a fraction of a second but revealing. The Fallujah injury still bothered him. Stone's breathing had elevated slightly from their first exchange. He was strong but not as young as he used to be, relied on power over endurance. Small advantages, probably meaningless against 2 experienced operators working in tandem. "Lieutenant Martinez," Stone said, his voice dropping lower, almost conversational. "Last chance to ring out. Go get that coffee. No shame in knowing your limitations. We can tell command you gave it your best shot." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. Everyone would understand. The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. Accept the out, prove you don't belong. Refuse and face the inevitable beating that would prove the same thing. Jessica's jaw tightened. Blood from her bitten tongue still tasted coppery in her mouth. "Huya, instructor," she said again, her voice steady. "I'm ready when you are." Stone's smile vanished. His eyes went cold. "All right then," he said quietly. "Brennan." The chief warrant officer nodded once. "Let's educate the lieutenant," Stone continued, "about real-world combat scenarios." They moved simultaneously, converging from opposite angles like a closing vise. And Jessica knew the real test had just begun. Time seemed to fracture into fragments as Stone and Brennan closed the distance. Jessica's training screamed at her to move, to create angles, to never let herself get caught between 2 opponents. She pivoted hard left, trying to force them into a single line where she could engage one while monitoring the other. Stone adjusted instantly, cutting off her escape vector. Brennan mirrored from the opposite side. They'd done this before, hunted together, fought together, moved with the synchronized precision of predators who'd shared a dozen battlefields. Jessica managed 3 seconds of defensive maneuvering, deflecting Stone's probing strikes while staying mobile enough to prevent Brennan from securing a grip. Her footwork was textbook, her hands fast and accurate. Several SEALs in the crowd nodded appreciation for her technical skill. Then Stone's expression shifted from testing to ending. "Lay flat." The command came sharp and military, as if this were a compliance drill, as if she were a detainee being subdued rather than a fellow service member in a training demonstration. The words carried just enough official weight to create a microsecond of confusion. Was this a legitimate order? A test of obedience under pressure? That microsecond was all they needed. Stone and Brennan moved with the brutal efficiency of a rehearsed takedown. Stone's right leg swept low and vicious toward Jessica's left knee, while simultaneously Brennan's boot drove into her right ankle from the opposite angle. The double-kick sweep was perfectly coordinated, perfectly timed, and completely against every training protocol in the Bud-S safety manual. The physics were inescapable. Both legs compromised simultaneously, no base to resist from, gravity taking over with pitiless certainty. Jessica's world inverted. The concrete rushed up to meet her with the inevitability of a closing tomb. She tried to break fall, to distribute the impact, but the speed and angle worked against her. Her back hit first, driving the air from her lungs in an explosive gasp that the crowd heard even over their own noise. Her head snapped back, the base of her skull bouncing off the unforgiving surface mere inches from the pad's steel edge. A miss that might have saved her from a fractured skull, but did nothing for the explosion of white light that detonated behind her eyes. Pain, immediate, total, overwhelming. Her lower back screamed where it had absorbed the primary impact. Her legs sang electric agony from knees to hips, where the kicks had landed with professional precision, not breaking bones, but close enough that the line between injury and career-ending damage blurred. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth where her teeth had clamped down on her tongue during impact. The California sky wheeled above her, too bright, too blue, reality tilting at strange angles as her inner ear struggled to recalibrate. Sounds became muffled, distant, as if she were underwater. Through the ringing in her ears she heard voices, some shouting, some laughing, most shocked into silence. Stone and Brennan stood over her, arms crossed in identical poses of dominance. From Jessica's ground-level perspective, they looked enormous, silhouetted against the sun like monuments to everything she was fighting against. Stone's face was carved from satisfaction. Brennan's expression was harder to read, something that might have been regret flickering there before professional detachment smoothed it away. "Maybe stick to intelligence work, sweetheart," Stone said, his voice carrying across the silent compound. "Plenty of women doing great work in analysis. Nobody's saying you can't serve. Just be realistic about where you fit." The words stung worse than the physical pain. Not because they were cruel. Jessica had developed armor against cruelty, but because they represented institutional dismissal wrapped in reasonable-sounding advice. The voice of every barrier she'd ever faced, dressed up as concern. Through her blurred vision, she could see the 282 SEALs watching. Some faces showed satisfaction, validation of their belief that women didn't belong in the teams. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, perhaps recognizing that what they'd just witnessed crossed a line. Many wore carefully neutral expressions, the look of men who'd learned to survive in a rigid hierarchy by not taking sides, not making waves, not risking their own positions by defending someone else. Rodriguez, her former classmate, stared at the ground. Chen had turned away entirely. Martinez watched with something that might have been pity. Nobody moved to help her. Jessica lay there, tasting copper and defeat, her body a symphony of pain, her mind struggling through the concussion fog to process what had just happened. She could quit. Right now. Roll over, admit they were right, take the honorable out they were offering. Transfer to intelligence or logistics or any of 100 other critical roles where her service would be valued and her gender wouldn't be a daily battle. The thought was seductive, sweet, easy. Her father had been right, they would never truly accept her. She could be perfect and it wouldn't matter. The system was rigged, the deck stacked, the outcome predetermined. Stone extended his hand downward, ostensibly to help her up but really to seal her humiliation with a gesture of magnanimous victory. "Come on, Martinez. Let's get you to medical. You gave it a hell of a shot. Nobody can say you didn't try." Brennan shifted his weight, favoring that damaged ankle. And something in Jessica's mind crystallized with perfect, diamond-hard clarity. She'd spent her entire life being told what she couldn't do, by her father, by society, by statistics and biology and well-meaning advisors. She'd internalized those voices, let them become the measuring stick against which she judged herself. Every success had to be twice as good to count as half as much. Every failure confirmed what everyone already believed. But lying there on that concrete, tasting her own blood, feeling the pain radiating through her injured body, Jessica realized something fundamental. She was tired of asking permission to exist in spaces she'd earned. Stone's hand hovered above her, waiting. Through swollen lips, Jessica smiled. Blood stained her teeth red. "I'm not done yet," she whispered. Then she moved. Stone's hand descended with calculated slowness, the gesture of a victor claiming his prize. His fingers were inches from Jessica's shoulder, ready to assist her off the concrete and into history as a cautionary tale, when every muscle in her body coiled like a spring wound past its tolerance. The pain was still there, screaming through her back, her legs, her skull. But pain was just information now. Data to be processed and filed away while her body executed the sequence her mind had already mapped out during those crucial seconds on her back. Jessica's right leg scissored out with whip-crack speed, hooking behind Stone's left knee. The movement was surgical, precise, targeting the exact pressure point where the popliteal nerve clustered. Simultaneously, her left foot drove upward and across her body, slamming into Brennan's damaged ankle, the one that still carried Fallujah shrapnel, the one she'd watched him test and favor, the weak point in his otherwise impeccable stance. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Stone's knee buckled as if the joint had simply stopped existing. His eyes went wide with shock, not pain yet, that would come later, pure disbelief that he was falling. His center of gravity shifted from stable to catastrophic in the span of a heartbeat, 6'3" and 230 pounds of muscle, an ego toppling like a demolished building. Brennan's ankle gave out with a wet popping sound that carried across the silent compound. The old injury, stressed past its rebuilt limits, betrayed him at the worst possible moment. His superior balance and combat experience meant nothing against basic biomechanics and targeted force. He went down hard, arms windmilling for balance that wasn't there. Both instructors hit the concrete within a half-second of each other. Stone's shoulder struck first, followed by his hip, the impact driving a grunt from his lungs. Brennan managed to break his fall slightly better, but his face still went gray as his ankle screamed protest. Their surprised gasps, almost comical in their synchronization, shattered the shocked silence like breaking glass. Jessica didn't wait to appreciate her handiwork. While Stone and Brennan were still processing their sudden acquaintance with the ground, she executed a kip-up that would have made her gymnastics coach from high school weep with pride. Her hands planted, her core contracted, and she exploded upward in one fluid motion that defied the injuries screaming through her body. She landed on her feet, slightly wobbly but unmistakably upright, while two decorated Navy SEAL instructors lay sprawled at her feet. For one frozen moment, the entire compound existed in suspended animation. Then the world detonated. "Holy shit," someone roared from the crowd. "Did you see that? She just dropped both of them." "No fucking way." The 282 SEALs erupted into chaos. Some were shouting approval, fists pumping the air. Others stood frozen in disbelief, mouths hanging open. A few were arguing already, voices rising in heated debate about what they'd just witnessed. The careful neutrality had shattered. This was too dramatic, too unexpected, too impossible to ignore. Rodriguez was jumping up and down like he just watched a game-winning touchdown. Chen had whipped off his sunglasses, staring with naked amazement. Martinez was laughing, actually laughing, the sound carrying clear across the compound. On the observation platform, Commander Rourke had removed his aviator sunglasses for the first time that morning. His weathered face showed something that might have been surprise, or might have been respect, or might have been the dawning realization that this demonstration had just escaped containment. Stone rolled onto his hands and knees, face transforming from shock to crimson rage. His legendary control, honed through 3 deployments and countless firefights, evaporated like water on hot concrete. "You bitch," he snarled, the professionalism stripped away to reveal raw ego and fury. "You fucking..." "Language, petty officer," Jessica interrupted, her voice carrying despite the blood in her mouth. She stood over him now, the power dynamic completely inverted. "There are junior enlisted present." The crowd's noise ratcheted up another notch. half of them howling with laughter at her audacity, the other half gasping at her disrespect. You didn't talk to a 3 bronze star seal that way. You especially didn't do it while he was on the ground, and you were the reason he was there. Brennan had made it to one knee, his face tight with pain, but his eyes were different now. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something Jessica recognized from her own mirror, the look of a warrior acknowledging another warrior. He tested his ankle gingerly, winced, then nodded slowly, a private gesture that said more than words could. Stone surged to his feet with the explosive power of wounded pride. His hands were clenched into fists, his neck corded with tension. Every line of his body screamed violence barely contained. This had stopped being a demonstration and become something personal, something dangerous. "That was a cheap shot," he growled, advancing on Jessica with none of the measured testing from before. "This was pure aggression. Sucker punch bullshit. That's not combat, that's what you just did to me." Jessica cut him off again, standing her ground despite every instinct screaming to retreat from the angry seal bearing down on her. "Double-team takedown while I was standing. That was textbook fair fighting." The crowd went absolutely silent. She'd said it, put words to what everyone had seen but few had wanted to acknowledge. Stone stopped 3 feet away, chest heaving, jaw working. The rage in his eyes was volcanic. Behind him, Brennan had levered himself fully upright, weight carefully off his damaged ankle, watching the confrontation with an unreadable expression. "You want fair," Stone's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "You want to prove you belong here, fine." He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck. "Let's go again, just you and me. No surprises, no tricks, straight combat." Jessica tasted blood and adrenaline and the copper tang of fear. Her back throbbed. Her legs felt like they'd been hit with baseball bats. Her vision still had spots dancing at the edges from the concussion. Stone outweighed her by 80 pounds, had a decade more combat experience, possessed knockout power that had put down men twice in his weight class. This was exactly the kind of fight she couldn't win. She met his eyes without flinching. "Hooya, instructor," she said. "Let's dance." Crowd pressed closer, the circle tightening like a noose. This wasn't a demonstration anymore. It had transformed into something primal, something that spoke to the ancient human hunger for combat, for hierarchy established through physical dominance. The 282 seals became a single organism, breathing in unison, waiting for blood. Stone rolled his shoulders one final time, his face settling into the blank mask of a professional fighter. The rage was still there. Jessica could see it burning behind his eyes, but he channeled it now, weaponized it. This was the man who'd cleared rooms in Kandahar, who'd earned the nickname Tombstone by leaving a trail of enemy casualties across 2 continents. He came in fast. Not the wild charge of an angry brawler, but the controlled explosion of a trained killer. His lead jab was a feint, drawing Jessica's guard high, while his real attack, a devastating low kick aimed at her already damaged left leg, came a split second later. The combination was textbook, brutal, designed to exploit injury and end fights quickly. Jessica barely got her shin up in time to check the kick. The impact sent shockwaves of agony through her leg, but she'd prevented the full force from landing. She countered with a straight right toward Stone's center line. He slipped it easily, his counterhook whistling past her jaw as she pulled back. They separated, reset, circled. The crowd was screaming now, a wall of sound that washed over them both. Jessica's world narrowed to Stone's eyes, his shoulders, his hips, the tells that would give her microseconds of warning before his next attack. Her training took over, the thousands of hours in the combative's gym layering muscle memory over conscious thought. Stone pressed forward again, this time mixing high-low combinations that forced Jessica to constantly adjust her defense. A jab to the face, a hook to the ribs, another devastating low kick. He was professional, efficient, systematically breaking down her defenses like a demolition expert placing charges. Jessica took hits she couldn't avoid. Stone's fist caught her cheekbone, snapping her head sideways. His elbow grazed her temple. A body shot drove the air from her lungs and left her ribs screaming. She tasted fresh blood, felt her left eye beginning to swell. But she gave back everything she took. When Stone overextended on a cross, Jessica's palm heel strike found his nose, not breaking it but making his eyes water and forcing him to reset. When he went for another low kick, she met it with her own, shin to shin, the crack echoing across the compound. She targeted his solar plexus, his liver, his jaw, anywhere she could reach, anything that might slow the inevitable. Because it was inevitable, Stone was bigger, stronger, fresher. Mathematics and biology don't care about determination. In a pure attrition fight, he would win. So Jessica stopped fighting his fight. The next time Stone rushed in, instead of defending, she stepped into the pocket, closer than he expected, too close for his power shots to fully develop. She grabbed his lead arm and pivoted, using his momentum against him, attempting a judo-style hip throw. Stone was too experienced to fall for it completely, but it forced him off balance, disrupted his rhythm. They grappled, a messy clinch where technique mattered more than strength. Jessica worked for underhooks, fighting for superior position. Stone tried to muscle her to the ground where his weight advantage would be overwhelming. They strained against each other, sweat and blood making grip slippery. Jessica's elbow found Stone's ribs, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. He grunted and shoved her away. She stumbled but stayed upright, her injured leg nearly buckling. "You're tough," Stone admitted, breathing hard now, a thin trickle of blood running from his nose. "I'll give you that." He wiped it away with the back of his hand. "But tough isn't enough." He came again, and this time Jessica could feel her body beginning to fail. The adrenaline that had carried her through the initial reversal was depleting. The injuries were accumulating. Her left leg was barely supporting weight. Her ribs felt cracked. Her vision swam at the edges. Stone sensed it too. His attacks became more aggressive, smelling victory. A spinning back fist that Jessica barely ducked. A knee strike that caught her thigh and nearly dropped her. He was setting up the finishing sequence, the combination that would put her down and keep her there. Jessica knew she had one move left, one opportunity before her body gave out completely. Stone loaded up for a haymaker right hand, the knockout punch, the exclamation point on his dominance. It was slight overkill, ego demanding a spectacular finish. His weight shifted, his shoulder telegraphed, his fist cocked back. Jessica didn't try to dodge or block. Instead, she stepped inside the arc of the punch, so close she could smell Stone's sweat, and drove her forearm upward into his extended elbow joint. Not breaking it, she wasn't trying to permanently injure him, but hyperextending it just enough to compromise the structure. Simultaneously, her other hand found his wrist, controlling it, and she dropped her body weight while pivoting. The standing armbar was textbook Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a technique that didn't require strength when executed with proper leverage and timing. Stone's own momentum and power worked against him. His elbow joint suddenly forced into an angle nature never intended. He had 2 choices: go down or let his elbow snap. Stone went down. Jessica rode him to the ground, maintaining the armbar, her body weight and positioning controlling his superior strength through mechanical advantage. She had him. Completely. A half-second more pressure and she could destroy his elbow, end his career, exact revenge for every humiliation. The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Stone's face was pressed against the concrete, his trapped arm extended, his free hand slapping the ground in the universal tap-out signal. He was done, defeated, at her mercy. Jessica held the position for 3 seconds, long enough for every single person watching to understand what was happening, long enough for the image to burn into memory, long enough to make her point. Then she released the lock and stood up. Stone lay there, breathing hard, his face a mask of shock and pain, and something that might have been humiliation. Jessica extended her hand downward to him, the same gesture he'd offered her minutes ago when she was on the ground, but stripped of condescension, offered with genuine respect. "Good match, instructor," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the blood running from her split lip. Stone stared at her hand for a long moment. The compound held its collective breath. This was the moment. Accept the gesture and acknowledge her as an equal, or refuse and cement the division forever. Slowly, his face working through a dozen conflicting emotions, Stone gripped her hand. Jessica pulled him to his feet. They stood there, two warriors battered and bloody, while 282 SEALs watched history being written in sweat and violence and grudging mutual respect. Brennan stepped forward, still favoring his ankle but standing tall. He looked at Jessica for a long moment, then nodded once, a single dip of his chin that somehow conveyed more than any words could. When he extended his hand, there was no hesitation in Jessica's response. "You earned it," Brennan said simply, his grip firm. "Every bit of it." The crowd exploded into noise, cheers and arguments and shocked exclamations all bleeding together into chaos. But Jessica barely heard it. Her legs were trembling with exhaustion and injury. Her vision was going gray at the edges. The adrenaline was crashing hard, leaving only pain and the bone-deep weariness that comes after surviving something that should have broken you. On the observation platform, Commander Rourke was descending the stairs, his face an approaching storm. And Jessica knew that surviving the fight was just the beginning. Commander James Rourke's boots hit the concrete pad with the finality of a judge's gavel. The crowd of SEALs parted instantly, creating a corridor through which he strode with the bearing of a man who'd commanded men in combat and had no patience for chaos in his training compound. His jaw was set like granite, his eyes hidden once again behind those aviator sunglasses that reflected the scene back at itself. Blood on concrete, two instructors trying to regain their composure, and one female lieutenant swaying on her feet like a tree about to fall. "Stone, Brennan, my office, now," the words cracked across the compound with parade ground authority that brooked no argument. "The rest of you next evolution in 15 minutes. Move." The 282 SEALs scattered like startled birds, but their departure was slow, reluctant, punctuated by backward glances and urgent whispered conversations. Jessica caught fragments as they dispersed. "Never seen anything like that." She actually took them both down. "Completely against protocol." "Hell of a fighter, though." "This is going to be a shit show." Stone and Brennan moved toward the commander's office in the main building, Stone's face still flushed with humiliation and rage, Brennan limping noticeably but maintaining his dignity. Neither looked back at Jessica. "Lieutenant Martinez," Rourke's voice was quieter now, controlled, dangerous in its calmness. "Medical facility, immediately. That's an order, not a suggestion." Jessica tried to stand at attention, but her body had other ideas. Her left leg buckled slightly, sending fresh lightning through her nervous system. "Yes, sir, I can." "You can barely stand," Rourke interrupted. "Corpsman Rodriguez, get over here." A young Navy corpsman materialized from somewhere in the dispersing crowd, medical bag already in hand. He took one look at Jessica and whistled low. "Ma'am, we need to get you sitting down. Now." The world tilted slightly as Rodriguez guided her to a nearby bench. Jessica's hands were shaking, post-adrenaline crash hitting hard, her body's delayed reaction to the trauma it had just endured. The corpsman began his assessment with professional efficiency, his hands gentle but thorough. "Severe contusions to both legs," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Possible left fibula fracture, will need x-rays. Facial lacerations, probable concussion based on pupil response. Ma'am, did you lose consciousness at any point?" "No," Jessica managed through lips that felt like they belonged to someone else. "Vision problems, nausea, ringing in your ears." All of the above. Rodriguez pulled out his penlight, checking her eyes again. You need a full neurological workup, sir, he addressed Rourke. She needs to go to the hospital, not just the base clinic. Rourke's expression remained unreadable behind those sunglasses. Transport is already en route. Lieutenant, while we wait, what happened out there? Jessica met her own reflection in his glasses. She looked like she'd gone 3 rounds in an MMA cage, blood crusted under her nose, left eye swelling shut, split lip, bruises already darkening across her cheekbones. Training demonstration, sir, as ordered. That wasn't a demonstration, that was, Rourke paused, choosing his words carefully, something else entirely. Yes, sir. Do you want to file a formal complaint? The question hung in the air like unexploded ordnance. Jessica's mind, still foggy from the concussion, tried to calculate the implications. Filing a complaint meant investigations, boards of inquiry, career consequences. For Stone and Brennan, certainly. But also for her, she'd be labeled a troublemaker, someone who couldn't handle the rough-and-tumble culture of the teams, someone who ran to authorities instead of handling problems internally. Not filing meant endorsing what had happened, accepting that double-team assaults during demonstrations were acceptable, setting a precedent that women in Bud S could be hazed with institutional approval. Jessica started, then stopped as her phone buzzed in her cargo pocket. She pulled it out with hands that still trembled. Dad calling. Of course. The SEAL community was small, interconnected. Word would have already spread through unofficial channels. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez, USMC retired, the man who told her she'd never make it, who discouraged her from even trying, was calling. The screen showed 3 missed calls from him already, plus a text message. Is it true? Did you really take down Stone and Brennan? Call me. Jessica stared at the message, emotions she couldn't name swirling through her concussed brain. Pride, vindication, the desperate need for her father's approval that she'd never quite outgrown. Sir, Rodriguez interrupted, I need an answer. Are you experiencing double vision, any numbness or tingling? Lieutenant, Rourke's voice cut through. The complaint, I need to know now. This goes in my incident report either way. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. Jessica's thumb hovered over her father's message, her mind replaying the demonstration, the double-kick takedown, the pain, the humiliation, Stone standing over her with that condescending offer to quit. Then her reversal. The look in Brennan's eyes when he'd acknowledged her as a warrior. The feeling of Stone's hand in hers when he'd accepted her help up. What she said in the next 30 seconds would define not just her own future, but potentially the future of every woman who tried to follow her path into naval special warfare. Ma'am, Rodriguez pressed, I really need you to focus. Count backward from 100 by 7s for me. 100, Jessica began automatically. 93, 86, her voice trailed off. Rourke removed his sunglasses for the second time that morning, his weathered face showing concern beneath the command authority. His eyes, gray and hard from 3 decades of service, studied her with an intensity that felt like being under a microscope. Lieutenant Martinez, he said quietly, I've been running Bud S for 4 years. I've seen a lot of things. What happened on that pad? He paused. There are protocols, safety regulations, standards of conduct. What Stone and Brennan did violated several of them. What you did in response. Another pause. That's the most impressive combat performance I've seen from a Bud S candidate in a decade. The admission seemed to cost him something. But impressive doesn't mean acceptable, he continued. This situation requires documentation, formal review, and I need to know, are you filing a complaint against your instructors? The ambulance pulled up to the training compound, its lights flashing red and blue across the concrete where minutes ago Jessica had been fighting for her professional life. Her phone buzzed again, another text from her father. Jess, I'm proud of you, call me when you can. Jessica looked at the message for a long moment. Words she'd waited years to hear, delivered via text while she sat bleeding on a bench, her career hanging in the balance. She looked up at Commander Rourke. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite everything, "I need to understand something first. If I file a complaint, what happens to the program, to the standards, to the next woman who tries to make it through Bud S?" Rourke's expression shifted slightly. Respect, maybe, or recognition of the question's weight. "That," he said carefully, "depends entirely on what we do in the next 72 hours. Hospital room smelled of antiseptic and institutional detachment. Jessica lay propped against starched white pillows, her left leg elevated and wrapped, a cold pack pressed against her swollen eye, IV fluids dripping steadily into her arm. The X-rays had confirmed a hairline fracture in her fibula, not severe enough to require surgery, but enough to sideline her from physical training for 6 weeks minimum. The concussion was moderate. The bruising was spectacular. Sitting in the plastic visitor's chair, still in his service Charlie uniform, was her father. Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez looked older than Jessica remembered from their last visit. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But he sat with the same ramrod posture that had defined 30 years in the Marine Corps, his weathered hands clasped between his knees, his eyes studying his daughter with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. They'd talked for an hour, really talked, maybe for the first time since she'd enlisted. He'd apologized for doubting her, for trying to protect her by discouraging her dreams, for not understanding that his daughter had inherited his warrior spirit even if she hadn't inherited his gender. She'd cried, blamed it on the concussion, and he'd held her hand with the careful tenderness of a man unused to such gestures. But that conversation was interrupted when Commander Rourke appeared in the doorway, his face carved from stone. "Gunnery Sergeant," Rourke nodded respectfully, "I need to borrow your daughter. There's a review board convening in 1 hour." Robert Martinez stood, his eyes hardening. "Sir, she's been hospitalized. Surely this can wait until—" "It can't," Rourke cut him off, not unkindly. "The Admiral has ordered an immediate investigation. Lieutenant Martinez's testimony is required." Jessica pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest from her ribs. "I'll be there, sir." 30 minutes later, she sat in a windowless conference room in the Bud S administrative building, facing a panel of 5 senior officers whose combined combat experience spanned 5 wars and 8 decades. The room was deliberately austere. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a long table separating the judges from the judged. Stone and Brennan sat at a smaller table to her left, both in their dress uniforms, both staring straight ahead with the fixed expressions of men facing court-martial. The panel's senior member, Rear Admiral Kenneth Hartwell, a silver-haired veteran with a Navy Cross and a reputation for brutal honesty, opened the proceedings. "Lieutenant Martinez, this board has been convened to investigate the incident that occurred at 6:23 hours this morning during a scheduled training demonstration. We've reviewed the preliminary reports, interviewed witnesses, and examined the medical documentation of your injuries." He paused, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers. "We need your account of what happened." Jessica had spent the last 3 hours thinking about this moment, about what truth to tell, what details to emphasize, how much damage to inflict. Stone and Brennan's careers sat in her hands like fragile eggs, one wrong word and she could crush them. She could describe the double-team assault in terms that painted them as predators, could emphasize the sweetheart comment, the institutional bias, the deliberate attempt to injure her, could destroy them with justified anger. Instead, she began carefully. "Sirs, what happened this morning is symptomatic of a larger institutional problem." Admiral Hartwell's eyebrow raised slightly. "Explain." The demonstration itself was a setup. Petty Officer Stone and Chief Warrant Officer Brennan were assigned to test my capabilities in a scenario that violated standard one-on-one protocols. But they didn't invent this approach. They were executing what they believed to be acceptable methodology for evaluating female candidates. She saw Stone's jaw tighten. Brennan's eyes flickered toward her. The real problem, sirs, isn't two instructors taking initiative to test a candidate's resilience. It's that somewhere in the chain of command, someone decided that female candidates require enhanced evaluation beyond the already brutal standards that eliminate 90% of male candidates. Admiral Hartwell leaned forward. Are you suggesting systemic discrimination? I'm suggesting systemic uncertainty, sir. The standards for SEAL qualification were designed for men. That's historical fact, not criticism. When women were allowed to attempt qualification, nobody knew how to evaluate us fairly. Some instructors genuinely believe women can't meet the standards. Others believe we need harder tests to prove we can. Both approaches create inequality. One of the other panel members, Captain Rodriguez, spoke up. You're defending the men who put you in the hospital. No, sir. I'm providing context. What Petty Officer Stone and Chief Warrant Officer Brennan did violated safety protocols and demonstrated poor judgment. They should face consequences for that. But ending their careers doesn't fix the broken system that produced this incident. The room fell silent. Jessica could feel Stone's eyes on her now, burning into the side of her head. Admiral Hartwell consulted his notes. We have testimony from 17 witnesses, some anonymously, describing a pattern of extra testing for female candidates across multiple training evolutions. Heavier rucksacks during land navigation, fewer rest periods during PT, deliberate isolation from training groups. He looked up. Were you aware of this? Yes, sir. And you didn't report it? Jessica met his gaze steadily. Reporting it would have labeled me unable to handle adversity. In special operations culture, the expectation is that you overcome obstacles, not complain about them. I chose to prove myself through performance rather than paperwork. By taking down 2 SEAL instructors in front of 300 witnesses, another panel member observed dryly. That wasn't my plan, sir. That was adaptation to circumstance. Admiral Hartwell made a note, then looked at Stone and Brennan. Gentlemen, do you have anything to say in your defense? Stone's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. Sir, I believed I was testing the lieutenant's capabilities under realistic combat stress. My methods were excessive. I take full responsibility for my actions. Brennan added quietly, I should have stopped it. I knew better. The lieutenant proved herself beyond any reasonable standard, and she did it despite our interference, not because of it. That says more about her character than anything else that happened this morning. The admission hung in the air. Admiral Hartwell looked at Jessica. Lieutenant, final question. Do you believe you can effectively serve in SEAL teams where some of your teammates may hold prejudices about your gender and capabilities? Jessica thought about Rodriguez cheering in the crowd, about Chen's amazed expression, about the men who'd supported her in the surf during Hell Week, about Brennan's respectful nod after their fight. Sir, I don't need every teammate to like me. I need them to trust that I can do my job. This morning, I demonstrated that capability to 282 witnesses. Some of them will never accept me. That's their problem, not mine. But enough of them saw what happened to know that I've earned my place. She paused, then added, the question isn't whether I can serve effectively. The question is whether naval special warfare is ready to evolve its culture to include warriors who don't fit the traditional mold. Admiral Hartwell studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. This board will deliberate and announce our findings within 72 hours. You're dismissed, Lieutenant. Jessica stood carefully, her injured leg protesting. As she turned to leave, Stone spoke quietly, Lieutenant. She stopped, looked back. You could have buried us, he said simply. Thank you for choosing not to. Jessica nodded once, then limped out of the room into an uncertain future, 3 weeks later, Hell Week arrived like a biblical plague. Jessica stood waist-deep in the Pacific Ocean at 200 hours, the water so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen burning every nerve ending. Her hairline fibula fracture hadn't fully healed. The doctors had cleared her for training with explicit warnings about re-injury, but clearance and capability were different animals. The fracture site felt like someone was driving nails through her leg with every wave that crashed against her body. Around her, 23 remaining Bud S candidates endured surf torture, the evolution designed to break minds, not bodies. They'd been in the water for 40 minutes. Hypothermia was setting in. Men were shaking so violently their teeth sounded like castanets. The instructors patrolled the beach with bullhorns and coffee, offering warmth and failure in equal measure. "Just ring the bell," an instructor called out. "Hot coffee, warm blankets, this suffering ends the moment you want it to." 2 candidates stumbled out of the water and rang the brass bell mounted on a post. 3 rings that meant quitting. That meant choosing comfort over agony. That meant admitting the price was too high. 21 candidates remained. Jessica's injured leg was the worst kind of agony, not the sharp pain of a fresh break, but the deep, grinding ache of damaged bone being stressed past its tolerance. The cold water actually helped in some ways, numbing the surface pain, but it also made the leg weak, unreliable. Each wave threatened to buckle her knee. She was going to quit. She knew it with the same certainty she knew the sun would rise. Her hand was already moving toward shore, her mind already accepting defeat. She'd proven her point 3 weeks ago. The review board had implemented new protocols, standardized evaluation criteria, oversight committees, bias training for instructors. Stone had been reassigned to training administration. Brennan had been formally reprimanded, but kept as an instructor, his evolution during the incident noted favorably. She'd won the war, she could surrender this battle. Her hand reached for the beach. Then SEAL candidate, Rodriguez, moved beside her in the surf. He didn't say anything, didn't look at her, just positioned himself slightly to her left, his body blocking some of the wave impact, taking weight she hadn't asked him to carry. His presence created a small pocket of slightly calmer water. Then Martinez shifted to her right, doing the same. Then Chen moved behind her, his body a windbreak against the offshore current. One by one, a dozen SEAL candidates repositioned themselves around Jessica, creating a human fortress in the freezing Pacific. They didn't make it obvious. The instructors would have shut it down immediately if they'd been blatant. But they were there, subtle and solid, sharing the suffering in a way that made it survivable. Rodriguez's teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak, but he managed. "We got you." Jessica felt something break inside her chest, not weakness, but the opposite. The realization that she wasn't alone anymore, that the demonstration 3 weeks ago had changed something fundamental. These men weren't helping her because she was a woman who needed protection. They were helping her because she was one of them, and SEALs don't let their teammates quit when they're capable of continuing. 45 minutes, an instructor bellowed. "Ring out now and you can be warm in 60 seconds. 3 more candidates stumbled toward the bell. 18 remained, shaking in the darkness, holding the line. Jessica's leg screamed. Her core temperature was dangerously low, but surrounded by her teammates, because that's what they were now, teammates, she found reserves she didn't know existed. Together, Chen managed through frozen lips. "We finish together." They stayed in the surf for another hour, lost 2 more candidates, but Jessica and her fortress of brothers survived. Graduation day came 6 months later, painted in California sunshine and ceremony. Lieutenant Jessica Martinez stood in formation with 14 other graduates. 15 had started Hell Week together. 1 had washed out during dive phase. She wore her dress whites, the fabric crisp and perfect, her posture parade ground straight despite the permanent ache in her left leg that doctors said might never fully disappear. The stands were packed. Press cameras lined the perimeter. The first female SEAL graduation was news, whether she wanted the attention or not. But Jessica's eyes found only one person in the crowd. Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez stood in the front row, wearing his Marine Corps dress blues despite being retired for 5 years. Medals gleamed on his chest: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Navy Cross from his own storied career. His weathered face was wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. Admiral Hartwell stepped forward to present the tridents, the gold special warfare insignia that transformed candidates into SEALs. When he reached Jessica, he paused, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "You didn't just earn this for yourself, Lieutenant. You changed the institution. That's the hardest mission there is." He pinned the trident to her chest with the traditional force, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to draw blood through the uniform, hard enough to leave a mark that would fade but never fully disappear. The metal bit into her skin with the weight of history and expectation. Jessica didn't flinch. The ceremony continued. Speeches about honor, commitment, sacrifice, the national anthem, the dismissal, then the chaos of celebration as families flooded the field. Her father reached her first, crushing her in a hug that would have embarrassed her teenage self, but now felt like vindication made physical. "I was wrong," he whispered into her hair. "About everything. I'm so damn proud of you, Jess." "I know, Dad, I know." Rodriguez appeared next, grinning like an idiot, his own fresh trident gleaming. "Team drink later. The whole Brotherhood's going." "Brotherhood includes me now?" Jessica asked with a raised eyebrow. Martinez, his expression turned serious. "It's included you since that day on the concrete, maybe even before. Some of us just needed to see it to believe it." Chen and Martinez joined them. The whole surf torture fortress reunited. They'd already started planning their first deployment, already arguing about specializations and team assignments like siblings fighting over toys. From across the field, Jessica spotted Brennan. He stood apart from the celebration, leaning on a cane, his Fallujah ankle finally requiring the surgery he'd postponed for years. When their eyes met, he nodded once. The same single dip of his chin he'd given her on the concrete pad, acknowledging what she'd accomplished, what she'd proven, what she'd cost him, and what she'd spared him. She nodded back. Then someone called her name. A reporter wanting a statement, wanting to know how it felt to be the first to break barriers, to make history. Jessica looked at her father's proud face, at Rodriguez and Chen and Martinez, her brothers in ways that transcended blood, at the 14 other graduates who'd survived the crucible beside her, at the golden trident on her chest that had been earned in freezing water and on concrete pads, and through every impossible test designed to break her. "How does it feel?" the reporter pressed. Jessica smiled, not the polite media smile, but the fierce grin of a warrior who'd fought for every inch of ground and refused to surrender. "It feels like the beginning," she said. Because it was. The first female SEAL was no longer a theoretical concept or a controversial possibility. She was real, standing in California sunshine, bleeding slightly under her dress whites where the trident had been pinned, surrounded by teammates who'd seen her fall and seen her rise and chosen to stand with her. The Brotherhood had evolved, not because anyone had lowered standards or made exceptions, but because one woman had proven that strength came in forms they hadn't recognized, that courage wasn't gender-specific, and that the warriors who earned their place through blood and suffering and refusing to quit belonged, regardless of what body they inhabited. Months later, on her first deployment, when Lieutenant Jessica Martinez breached a door in Ramadi beside Rodriguez and Chen, when she cleared rooms with the lethal efficiency that made her trident meaningful rather than symbolic, when she proved again and again that the Brotherhood was defined by capability and character rather than chromosomes, the story of that concrete pad in Coronado would be told and retold. But it would no longer be told as a controversy. It would be told as the day naval special warfare learned that evolution doesn't weaken institutions, it strengthens them. And every time a young woman looked at the impossible and decided to try anyway, Jessica Martinez's name would be there. A reminder that barriers exist to be broken by those brave enough to bleed for it. The end.